Hello, and welcome to Chapter 1, Lecture 1.1, Prevention Philosophy. I am so excited to be here and start to talk to you about all of the really important things and fundamentals that go into this class. And as we go throughout the semester, you're going to find that we're going to talk about so many different areas that really touch the hospitality industry in so many different ways. And it is really going to prepare you to be a very strategic and value-added team member no matter what you do. And this is probably one of the most important chapters because it's going to build the overall foundation that we have for this course, and that we really have to set up this understanding of how is law integrated into everything that we are going to do. So let's get started. So first thing, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this idea of what is hospitality law. Because believe it or not, there really isn't something that exists. And you might say, wait a minute, what do you mean it doesn't exist? If you are someone that wants to go to law school, and maybe some of you know this about me, I actually was originally planning to go to law school, is that you don't go and say, hey, I want to be a hospitality lawyer. There's no area to really build this particular area, meaning that it's so broad and so vast and so much that it's not a specific discipline. It actually is all encompassing into many different disciplines that make it real. But overall, when we're talking about hospitality law, it really has a lot to do with the legal and social practices that are related to the treatment of persons. And these persons are our guests, they're our customers, our clients, our patrons, who are going to value and participate or purchase some type of service from us as the hospitality entity. And virtually this can mean any and all businesses. And hospitality law itself, even though it's kind of this really vague and broad term, it's really intended to protect both those that are owning and operating and practicing in the business, as well as the guests. And that's against any injury, whether it be accidental or intentional. And throughout this course, you're going to see that we all have a responsibility to make sure that we protect the welfare of those that are going to participate in our type of business or our setting, whatever it may be. And you might have talked a little bit about this in other classes. I know typically I talk about it in hotel management, so you might find that you've talked about it in that course, your intro to hospitality course, your facilities management course, whatever that may be. And overall, this umbrella is so big because it relates to literally food service, travel, the lodging industries, and it really is going to govern how we see and what we do inside the world of transportation, inside our hotels, what's happening inside restaurants, our bars, our spas, our theme parks, and literally the list goes on and on and on. And you know, what's really interesting, and we'll talk about it throughout this semester, is that with COVID-19, it has really changed some of the practices that we see inside our space, you know, particularly when it comes down to events. And, you know, it has a lot to do with these clauses that we're going to find and talk about in contracts. And, you know, what happens if there's a COVID outbreak and we have to cancel? Is it refundable? Is it not refundable? Who's liable if someone gets COVID at an event, or if someone goes into my hotel and gets COVID? Because, you know, before COVID, there wasn't really a lot of policy around that. And the reason is, outside of different outbreaks like SARS, if you're familiar with that, that really hit the hospitality industry pretty hard. And there are definitely some others that, although they've really formed the backbone of a lot of crisis management, they haven't necessarily done so from a law perspective. And we'll talk about that throughout this entire semester. So I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. So here's a video, and I really want you to make sure that when you're in Blackboard, you're going to see that I'm going to post this recording, but then I also post this video. Please just click on the video link. I'm not going to do it here with you now, but this is actually the author of your textbook. And, you know, one of the things I want to at least empathize with you is that I know the textbook is not an easy read. I know that the textbook literally jumps everywhere and is throwing content at you every chance it gets. But don't worry, that's where I come in. We're going to take it one step at a time, and your assignments are going to really help you to think about the content that you just learned about and what does it really mean into the physical space that I'm working within. So please take a look at this video on, you know, in the actual PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to skip through it right here to keep this time minimal, but it gives you an overview of what is hospitality law, how was this term coined, and the perspective on your textbook, because that is one of the authors. Now, as a hospitality leader, as you have probably already found out through either your professional work experience, your internship, is that we really become multitaskers. We become jacks of all trades. And that's because we are called to frequently make decisions that are going to impact the legal standing of your employees. And from this moment forward, this is what I want you to think about every time you do something, is that every time you write an email that is now admissible in a court of law, every time that you send a text message, every time that you might make a phone call and it's on a recorded line, and you really need to know what you do, how you do it, and the methods in which you're getting across your message, what that might mean if you're inside the legal purview. And that's what this course is really about, to help you understand that. And really, your decisions may or may not increase your organization's chance of needing an attorney. And what's interesting is most organizations, particularly large-scale ones inside hotels, food and beverage, you're going to see that often legal counsel is part of the overall operating team. And the most important thing that you're going to get out of this course is, how do you manage this environment that you're going to find yourself in? Because we're not asking you to be a lawyer. We're not asking you to be able to dictate and rattle off, different statutes that might be governed in the business that you operate. But what you are going to be responsible for is to make decisions in which you are informed, to make sure that you are doing the best that you possibly can to protect yourself as well as those that you serve. So there are a couple of things in here that I believe your textbook agrees, and probably every other hospitality faculty member agrees with, is that you're going to have and should grasp three main concepts. So if you get anything out of it, these are the three that you need to get out. Is that laws are going to have historical origins, and you do need to know them. And we're going to talk about, even differences between criminal and civil law, and what does that mean, and where do we fall, and where did this all stem from? And I'm going to give you some of the history, and really, I love the history. I will tell you, though, the world of law is a ton of tongue twisters. So I'm just going to apologize now. There are some of these lectures that I have literally recorded 15 times, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to deal with it, because I just can't pronounce some of these correctly the first time, the second time, and maybe not the third time. So I hope you don't struggle like I do, but you just might, because a lot of tongue twisters that are out there. And the next piece is that all of these laws that we're going to talk about is that they have this evolutionary nature, and they really are reflected upon and change based upon the changes that we see in society. And not sure if anybody follows anything, but even, the really big decisions that have been made right now regarding some law and women's rights. I mean, this is some of the fundamental changes that we're seeing, and these can impact laws in a lot of different areas. And we're going to talk about how some of those are all connected. And it really is possible to use this idea, this philosophy of, preventative management to manage the overall legal environment. And this is what this first chapter is really about, because your goal should be to minimize litigation. And I'm going to tell you that depending upon what segment you work in, sometimes litigation is rampant. So those of you that might be targeting a casino, casinos are often unionized entity and properties, and there's a lot of litigation. Now, it might not be litigation in the sense of you're going to be in a courtroom and you're going to have a jury, but it might be in the sense of arbitration and different meetings that you have to go to, and you have to, present in front of mediators or so forth, or, part of the overall grievance process. So we're going to talk a lot about that, but there should be this idea of a preventative or prevention management to really try to avoid litigation at all costs, because there are a lot of penalties that go along with it. So one of the things that, as we go through this, I want you to consider, and this is what I want you to consider when you might be reading through a chapter and you're like, man, I can't do this, or wow, this is really hard, or I'm not a lawyer and I don't understand this. It's okay. I know it's difficult content. I'm here with you on that. That's why I'm trying to make all of these, voice recorded lectures as easy as possible. I'm adding notes in many of them. So if you look through the PowerPoints, you're going to see my notes on there. I give you opportunities to deep dive. I'm trying to give you all the resources at your fingertips because you don't need to become an expert at memorizing all the information. You need to know how to navigate successfully. So when you need to know certain information, that you can find it, you know where it is, you know how to navigate it, and you know how to potentially break it apart to try to understand it and what it means in an operational environment. Because unfortunately for all of us, we work in a very unique and diverse operating environment. And even myself working, across country, having my home base in Las Vegas, Chicago, and even Atlantic City, and trying to understand how to work within a unionized environment with, different agreements, master agreements, local agreements, and then you have your next layers of federal and state laws when it has to do with discrimination and compensation and right to work states, and all of this stuff is thrown at you. But there's going to be different resources at your fingertips, whether it's content I'm going to provide you in the workplace, whether it's your HR representative, your legal counsel representative, or whatever it may be. But we work in this diverse operating environment, and because of that, we just have to be more knowledgeable on how to search and find some of the information. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that 60 to 70% of the decisions that you're going to make on a daily basis are going to have legal dimensions to them. There is going to be some type of rule regulation that is going to dictate how you should behave, how you are going to answer. If not, on the other side, it's going to be the consequence that you're going to have to face. And really, all of the decisions that we make have the potential for litigation. So I don't want to say that to scare you. I want to say that to you that we have a really complex work environment, but we can be successful together when we know where the resources are and how to use them. So that's the biggest point as we go through this entire semester. So I want to start to go through this idea of some terms. So when you look in Blackboard, you are going to see that there are lots of terms, and I give you what we call legalese, and you're going to see that throughout your textbook. And these are going to be different terms that you should probably know. That doesn't mean you have to go out and memorize them, but I give you that long list because it's probably something you want to download and take with you after this course. So if you're in that situation, someone starts talking about it, you have the same general foundational understanding as someone else. And when you do this, it really helps you to understand some of the distinctions. So we're going to start with the basics today. What is an attorney? Because you might have heard an attorney and you might have heard of a lawyer. Are they the same? Are they different? Because I would argue that we probably use them interchangeably. And when we start to think about it, I'm going to go through what these terms are. So first, in terms of education, they're both educated in the law, and they're going to understand the technical definitions that are associated with different aspects and parts of the law and what they pertain to. But let's start with what a lawyer is. So the word lawyer actually has Middle English origins and refers to someone who is educated and trained in law. Lawyers are people who have gone to law school and often may have taken and even passed the bar exam. An attorney has French origin, and it stems from the word meaning to act on the behalf of others. The term, therefore, attorney is an abbreviated form of the formal title, which would have been attorney at law. And an attorney is someone who is not only trained and educated in law, but also practices it in court. So a basic definition of an attorney is someone who acts as a practitioner in a court of law. So when we start to think about the differences between those, and if you're really curious about this, please definitely take a look in the notes section, because I then start to break down even more what are the differences, what does it mean, who typically are advisors, and then what does it mean to be in court, and do they all have to pass the bar exam? So I want you to definitely take a look at that if you're someone that's curious, or maybe, hey, you're considering law after this. So then the next one is this idea of litigation. Litigation is the process of taking a dispute to a court of law. So if parties cannot agree between themselves about the fair and proper outcome of any type of dispute that they're dealing with, what they're going to do is to present their respective cases to a court for its judgments. So it is really a broad term that describes a long and sometimes complex process depending upon even what state we're in. So what you'll find is that there are usually different stages that go into litigation, and it also depends what is the root cause. Is it civil? Is it criminal? Where does it fall? So again, I have some additional notes for you in the notes section, and I'm going to direct you there because I want you to get familiar with using that as an additional resource, because it's going to be important for you as you start to navigate this class. So then we're going to go into this idea of what is a law. So in its most basic and simple form, it's rules of conduct, right? And it's enforced by society. It's also enforced by entities, right? And you're going to find we have a whole chapter where we're going to talk about entities, both at the state, local, and federal levels. But really it is, what is the law? How's it interpreted? And how's it enforced? So, often this idea is, why do we have law and what is it? It is really, it's this idea that unfortunately we have to have some type of constraint and guidelines. And within this, it really helps us to live in a way that's supposed to promote the welfare of all. And typically most laws are widely accepted, but on the other side, a lot of them do generate, controversies. But overall, laws play a central role in the social, political, and economic life that we all live in. And overall, these laws, which have become a set of rules that are created by many institutions, which then have authority to enact on behalf of those, meaning to keep order. So this idea of law and what we're going to find here, and there's so many variations, like you're going to find in the state of New Jersey, we have some of the most absolutely complicated laws, not only relative to hospitality, but to other areas. So unfortunately, we might see and experience variation from everywhere we go, even at a local level. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of what does it mean to be a hospitality leader? What does it mean for me to know that 60 to 70% of the decisions I make have some legal basis? What the heck does that mean for me? Well, it just means that you need to know, recognize, and understand. And that's what this course is supposed to do. It is supposed to get you to learn about the historical origins of the laws, those rules, those guidelines that are set in place, who's responsible for the authority in more or less policing those. And then how do we recognize where we have evolution, where we have room to grow, some of those gray areas you might have heard in law, like loopholes that are there, and you're going to see why they're written this way. And then to understand how do we use this preventative philosophy to mitigate and really minimize our chances of ever getting to litigation. So these are the three core fundamentals of this entire class. So let's jump into some of the foundations and what this means when it comes to the origins. And, first I want to go into this definition of what is common law. And sometimes common law is also referred to as case law. And it really is this body of unwritten laws based on courts' practices and experience. So it's sort of this backup solution when the written statutory law has no straightforward answer. So if you've ever looked at some laws or contracts, they're just confusing. And simply, common law is the law that is derived from judicial decisions instead of the statutes. And a statute is a law enacted by a legislature. So statutes are also called acts. So to give you some examples of acts that you might be familiar with, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 just might be an example of that. And we're going to talk about lots of acts in here, particularly when we get to discrimination law, or really discrimination statutes that are relative to what we're going to be doing. And federal laws have to be passed by both houses of Congress. So that means the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. And then it usually requires the approval from the president before it can take effect. So this idea of common law includes the history, the detailed records of decisions made by judges in cases and even unusual cases where there was no clear legislation that applied. And the prior decisions are often known as legal precedences. So that's why sometimes the decisions that you make, you literally can establish a current practice that then everything will have to follow suit. So this is, again, why you have to be really, really careful as to the decisions that you make. And the main principle that sustains the common law is that it considers that once a question receives an answer in front of a court, the same response should be delivered for all similar cases in the future. So if you've ever watched any of these law shows, you're going to see how they might state, well, in the case of Smith versus Jones, they found this, and therefore this is the case law, the common law that is followed from that. So that's kind of where you get some of that. And this common law is practiced in various countries of the world, and sometimes is even taken into consideration when new legislation is issued. So the U.S. common law system actually grew out of the British tradition that spread to North America back in the 1700s and the 1800s. And I want to give you some examples to kind of really tie this and bring it to life. So I want you to think about common law, and the first one that comes to mind is the idea of common law marriage. And it's a well-known argument that's covered in common law. So in a common law marriage, two people who have cohabitated for an extended period of time. Now, the period of time can vary by jurisdiction, but it holds themselves out to the community as married, can potentially be legally considered to have the rights of spouses, even if they have never registered that they're married with the government. So that's just an idea of common law, and we see that in lots of different areas. So please take a look at the notes section. You're going to see a lot of content on this if you want to take a deeper dive. I now want to go into this idea of what is civil law. So in the United States, there are two bodies of laws whose purpose is to really deter or punish serious wrongdoing or to compensate the victims of the wrongdoings. And in that case, it's criminal law is going to deal with behavior that is or can be constructed as an offense against the public, society, or even the state, even if the immediate victim is an individual. So examples that fall under criminal law is murder, assault, theft, drunk driving. Civil law deals with behavior that constitutes an injury to any individual or other private party, such as a corporation. So examples of this could be defamation, if you ever heard of that, like defamation of a character. It can be breach of contract. It can be negligence that results in injury or death. It can be property damage. So in civil cases, by contrast, cases are typically initiated, meaning that suits are filed by a private party. That private party is the plaintiff. Cases are usually decided by a judge, though there might be a significant amount of cases that may involve juries, and punishment almost always consists of a monetary award and never consists of imprisonment. And most of the time that has a lot to do with liabilities and wrongful acts that may constitute a public offense and a private injury. So I actually, in the notes section, I'm going to give you an actual link. If you want to click on there, it's going to give you some more history on civil law as well as criminal law, if that's something you're interested in. So as we get to this evolutionary nature of common law and hospitality law, is that as a hospitality leader and a manager, you need to be familiar with your own state's law. When I say your own state's law, wherever you're working, you need to know those state laws. If you have suppliers in other states or vendors in other states and you do some type of collaboration, you also need to know those laws and how they're going to affect your operations and your different employment situations. Because what happens is we get to different instances where we have to follow different rules, regulations, and guidelines that are critical to those particular locations. And within this, often within hospitality law, one of the biggest concerns is the idea of negligence. And negligence refers to a venue's lack of reasonable care to ensure the safety of its guests. So an injured party does not have to prove that you knew about an unsafe condition if they can prove you did not exercise reasonable care in preventing the problem, right? So this is really complex. So this idea of reasonable care actions can include inspecting the different facility, looking at the furniture, the equipment on a regular basis, doing background checks for employees, doing training, a supervisory protocol, clean areas for food and beverage preparation and service. It could be security measures that are taking place inside the building, and anything that might be taken in order to avoid a previous incident. So, as we even think about this idea of negligence, to bring this home to you, one of the most common ones inside hospitality is a slip and fall. So it's the most common form of an accident, and it is frequently so great that it's almost now a common legal term, And common causes often that we're seeing are, carpets that were not properly secured to the floor, electrical cords laid across floors, wet floors caused by a leaky ceiling or janitorial work, objects or liquids on the stairs, like the treads of the stairs, hand railings that are slippery. So I just want you to think for a second. Think about the last time that you walked through your place of employment and think about how many times you've seen those violations. Pretty darn often, right? So remember, when it comes to this idea of civil law, often it's monetary reward, right? And this is why organizations have to be really, really careful. Because if you have something like a trade show or a meeting and there are speakers, right, often if you're requiring them to use your equipment, you are now liable. Even if they put that cord across the floor and somebody else trips over it or they trip over it, you gave them the cord. You could have prevented that. So again, you have to become familiar with some of the responsibilities and some of the things that you might be held liable for. And in the notes section, I really take a deeper dive on some negligence, particularly around security. And the reason I'm taking a deeper dive in security is because of everything that's happening from a terroristic perspective, and some of the different causes that we're seeing from terrorism that happens particularly abroad. So this is going to end the first of 2 voice recorded lectures for this week. And I just want to, at the end of each week, I'm going to give you what your to-dos are. And remember, you need to read the first chapter in your textbook. I know it's not an easy read. I want you to try to go through it. Pace yourself. Read some of the examples that they provide you. They're all relative to what you're going to be experiencing. Remember, at the end of the week, you're going to have a weekly reflection. Make sure that you start to build those reflections. And then, of course, at the end of this second lecture, at the end of your reading, even if you submit your reflections a little early, I will give you feedback. Then I want you to jump in and take the chapter quiz. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I look forward to you joining me for Chapter 1, Lecture 1.2. Thank you.